18, 2017. This ordinance would codify 2 ways for Boston residents to participate in the legislative process. 1, any residents can submit a petition, which the council may act on at its discretion. And 2, a petition signed by 500+ residents must be given a hearing within 3 months. Petitions must be something that could be passed and ordered by the City Council. Petitions exclude matters affecting council operations and organization, emergency measures, loan orders and appropriations, personnel, elections and appointments, referenda, and initiative petitions. The council need not address a petition if there has been substantially similar proceeding within the previous calendar year. Hearings may be held on multiple petitions at once, and the city clerk may outline further procedures and policies regarding submission and acceptance of petitions. On a housekeeping note, I just want to remind folks that this is a public hearing and is being recorded and will be broadcast on Comcast 8, RCN 82, Verizon 1964, and online. And just ask folks to please silence your cell phones and other devices. We are joined here by my colleagues in order of their arrival. City Council Michelle Wu, who's the lead sponsor. City Councilor Ed Flynn, I believe, was next. City Councilor, who was after Ed? City Council Anissa Wasabi George.
Kim was here.
City Councilor Kim Janey. After Flynn, so it's going to go Michelle Wu, it's going to go Ed Flynn, it's going to go Kim Janey, it's going to go Anissa Wasabi George, it's going to go Josh Sakem, because you guys come in together, it's going to go Council President Campbell.
I don't know. I think you might have it wrong.
All right, we'll figure it out. Councilor McCarthy, Councilor Matt O'Malley, and joining us at the dais is Councilor Lydia Edwards. And also, we have a colleague who sends a letter in, and I'll read it. Dear Chairman Flaherty, I regret, due to a long scheduling commitment, I'm unable to participate in today's Committee on Government Operations hearing on the ordinance regarding right to free petition. I want to thank Councilor Wu and all the advocates for crafting this ordinance and elevating this critical conversation. The right of participation is just another form of communication from our constituents and the dialogue of democratic government. I support the idea of this ordinance and look forward to continued discussion. My Policy Director, Ron Claude, will be available at today's hearing, and I will intend to review the tape of today's hearing. Sincerely, Ayanna Presley, Boston City Councilor at Large. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the lead sponsor. I know we have 3 guests here from the administration, our clerk and former city councilor and our city clerk, Maureen Feeney, joined by our election commissioner, Dion Irish, and also Sabina Piemonte from the election department as well. So without further ado, Councilor Wu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much to the administration and representatives who were with us when we had a hearing on this last term as well. I want to start with a big thank you to the person whose brainchild this is, which is Jamal Crawford. He's here with us. Jamal had reached out to my office and said, hey, you know, the state has this right of free petition that allows residents to file bills up at the State House. Could we do that here? And upon doing some more research, we figured out that we could actually even do better than that by codifying it at the city level, as about a dozen other cities in Massachusetts have done. Because when it's codified at the city level, it's not just about submitting something that may go into a pile and be taken up by a rep or not. It's actually about guaranteeing a hearing within a certain amount of time. So I want to quickly read down the list of other cities so we have a sense of who already does this. It's Newton, Winthrop, Bridgewater, Gloucester, Lawrence, Randolph, Amesbury, Chelsea, and Newburyport. And the number of signatures that they require as the minimum threshold range from 50 to 150 signatures. And they guarantee hearings then to happen either within 2 months or 3 months. That's the general sense. My office over the course of last term had reached out to the clerks and counselors in each of these municipalities. I can share that again this year if you'd like, but overall the feedback was resoundingly that they don't have an issue in terms of this overwhelming business or anything. Most of these cities and towns see 1 or 2 a year. I know Boston is very different than some of these municipalities, and we are more active here. But they all lauded this as a great way to engage residents and make sure that they were fully accountable, fully responsive to what the community wanted to talk about. So similarly, I want to point out that there are a few small changes since this has been refiled compared to last term. The biggest one is that the signature threshold was increased. And I know we've gone back and forth, and I personally I cringe at doing this. It was submitted with 250 signatures at first. most closely matching the signature threshold that someone would have to hit to run for office for district council, which is about 200, 250. But feedback from colleagues and from the last hearing, we've increased that to kind of get at the number for essentially 2 districts, that if you want to bring something to the full council, it should be a citywide issue and have a slightly higher threshold. We're certainly open to discussing that number and what's appropriate, but what I would hope is that at the baseline, we have a way for residents to truly engage with city government, and particularly the council. There were other minor changes made, particularly in response to Madam Clerk's feedback around the timing and making sure that the clock wouldn't start until after certification of signatures rather than just the clerk's office receiving that. And I think that was it. So my final comments are just, I think this matters more than ever right now in this moment in our political times, when citizen engagement and really involving residents deeply in our business of government matters beyond just the actual hearings that we'll have or the policies that might come out of it, all of which are extremely important. But I think the biggest problem that our country is struggling with right now is lack of trust and lack of communication and partnership between residents, government, and other institutions. And this would be the direct way to make sure that we are hearing about everything that matters to people, opening ourselves up in the way that would be the best for the city and all of our communities. So I'll have more questions for specific reps, but just wanted to thank everyone for hearing this again.
Very good. Thank you, Council, as the lead sponsor. And unless my colleagues have any desire to dive right in, we can get right into the panel discussion. I see Dion's with us, and also Madam Clerk. I'll defer to you as to who should start off. From the administration.
So, good afternoon, Chairman Flaherty, Council President Campbell, and all the other members of this esteemed body. My name, again, is Dion Irish, Commissioner of the Boston Election Department and Chairman of the Board of Election Commissioners. I appreciate the invitation to testify today regarding this ordinance that's intended to promote transparency and engagement with constituents, because these topics are topics that Mayor Walsh cares deeply about. The Election Department stands ready to be as helpful as we can in providing input on this legislation. Should it be approved, we will do our best also to fulfill our role in its implementation. Overall, we have no major issues with the proposal, but there are things that we would like to make the council aware of so as to manage expectations, and there are also details that would need to be worked out that we'd have greater interest in as it relates to the Election Department. The first thing I'd like to point out is the limitation on data. We don't have information on 100% of the residents of the city of Boston. When we do our annual census, we have information from folks who respond to our census. We have information on folks who are registered voters. And beyond the census responses, we also collect information from a variety of sources so we could do a thorough job with our annual census. So we collect information from area colleges, from management companies, et cetera. We do email blasts to all city agencies. And to culminate the process, we do a door-to-door canvassing of the entire city, sometimes at least twice during the summer months. So we're very confident in the data that we do have, but just want to caution that it's not 100% of all of the residents in the city.
And Dion, so would your preference be that they be registered voters, or a combination of registered voters and residents, but that you just don't have 100% accuracy on? Well,
I'm not prepared to give a preference. I just wanted to state the limitation when we refer to just residents. The other limitation that we would have now.
But say someone wants to do a free petition and someone hands you a stack of signatures. You have to now go through the name and the address and the ward and the precinct, all that stuff you would do as if.
Yes, so what we'd have to do for this, because the voter registration database that we use to validate signatures for other types of things like candidacy and petitions is not something that we could use for this purpose. We would have to download information for each petition and create a separate database that we'd have to, of residents only, that would match up signatures on their list too.
And would that be a cumbersome process? Can you just take us through how that would work and how long it would take and what resources you would need to do that?
Yeah. So I asked Sabina to get into some of the details of what that would look like, because he'd actually be putting that together. Sure. But what I would like to say, though, is that it's very important that we have sufficient time because of the fluctuating work and needs of the department. If we have to process petitions at the time when we're doing, we're up against a registration deadline or deadline to certify signatures for candidacy or other activities that come up, then we'd need more time than at other times when we'll be able to process things more quickly. But Sabina, if you could please just speak to some of the details of how we'd create this database.
Sure. So our plan, obviously we'll need more clarification on how and what's needed for this, is to take a snapshot of our database as it stands for each petitions as they're submitted, and then use that to verify the signatures that are submitted to us. Another thing to keep in mind, all registered voters do supply us with a signature of their registration, whether it's through the online system or a paper form. Residents are not required to give us a signature for every single individual. So there could be times where we're getting a signature from a resident that we can't compare it to anyone and give a good, valid signature to that person. In regards to making copies of the database, once we have the first system set up, I don't think it's going to be that much time to do that, but it is time to verify 500 signatures. And in times when we have elections going on, with preparations for elections, early voting season is coming upon us as well. That's the thing that Dion is asking for the extended time. And one other caveat is we only capture residents 17 years of age or older. So if there are residents that are signing any petitions that are under 17, we do not have that in our database.
Very good. And that concludes the election department.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that we would like to discuss, and maybe a working session is what's appropriate to have this conversation, but we wanted to get into some of the details as to what forms would be used, what the process and procedures, the details that would make it run smoothly for constituents and for the agencies involved. Very good.
And then, Madam Clerk, if we could turn it over to you from your perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and councilors. It's a privilege to be here. With regard to the matter that is before us, in many ways, it's almost like a reversal of job descriptions, because we're asking constituents to come and file legislation. Oops, sorry about that. Or proposing legislation. But as has been indicated, there are several other cities and towns that feel that this has been a great tool in engaging, and certainly we don't need to go any further than look at the last several elections and how many people are coming out and voting. And, you know, perhaps this is a tool to increase the voting turnout in elections. But one thing I want to go on the record as stating, there is nothing in the council rules or in the city charter that requires a hearing. So, not that anyone would do this, and certainly it would be irresponsible to, but you technically could pass the budget without a hearing, which is never going to happen, but there is nothing preventing you from putting something in committee and then the next week taking it out. You know, obviously a committee report is a very helpful tool, but so that in and of itself, based on timelines, when they talk about anything that's filed 3 months before the end of the year would be refiled because it can't be taken up for consideration in that window. There are some other concerns that I would express, and that is that a hearing be held within 2 weeks. Once we receive, as you know, where the clerk's office is the filing agency for the city of Boston, everything that comes into our office gets time-stamped. But in this instance, that information would then be hand-delivered, probably to Sabino, providing our wonderful election commissioner directs it that way, it would begin the process of really certifying these names. And So it might be our suggestion that we don't start any clock until the names have been certified, because it could be in the middle of a campaign or nomination papers. And, you know, it's hard to say, it's not that we want to say one is more important than the other, but, you know, I think it's like everything else. We sort of have to take things as we receive them, but also be aware of the environment in which something gets filed. So that would be one concern I have. And even after certification, in the months of July and August, I think at least in July, and maybe in August also, we only have one meeting. So we'd be right off the bat that 2 weeks wouldn't work. And so, you know, I think to just change that language on the second page, that just might be, or the next hearing, or the next council meeting, something like that, that it does?
Through the chair to Councilor Wu.
Oops, I'm sorry.
Sorry,
Yes.
I didn't mention, I think that might have been one of the changes reflecting your
Right,
feedback from
yes.
last time. So just for total clarification on the timelines, it's 3 months from date of, oh, sorry, okay. So 3 months from the date of filing, but 2 weeks from the date of submission to the clerk's office. It says, unless an extension is granted by the city council president to try to take into account what time of year and whether there's other elect signature certification happening, or at the next scheduled city council meeting, specifically to address that summer schedule. I think personally, I understand everything that's happening, but would hate for the clock to only start after certification, just because then it would essentially be saying that we're not going to entertain this at all during certain months of the year where there are elections happening. But with a process set up that an extension could be granted by the city council president, under those circumstances, that at least creates a way, if it's, if the workload is truly too much, but it doesn't automatically bar certain months of the year from this happening.
And the other issue that I would just raise, and we're certainly more than happy to take on this responsibility, but it speaks to hearings of 2 or more petitions filed under the section that may be held at the same time and place, which is certainly within the purview and is done on many occasions. But it then goes on to say that the city clerk will issue notice of the hearings to the first 10 persons whose names appear on the petition within the 48 hours. And we're happy to do that if we want to take on that practice for free petitions. But historically, that is a function that has been done by central staff so as to keep sort of information closer at hand to the counselors, so that they will have a better sense of who's coming, who will be testifying, that kind of thing. So I'm happy to have the clerk's office take on that responsibility, and that might be something that you want to think about. So other than that, we're prepared to assist in any way possible. If there are any other questions, we're available today or any other day to answer any questions as you move forward with this proposal.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Chair recognizes Councilor Wu. Any questions of this panel before we
sure.
turn to our colleagues?
Okay, so let's see. I had a couple points that I wanted to address. So one, that was a good point by Madam Clerk around council rules would maybe need to be changed to include this portion, but something that the council could do. I had a question on the census age. So right now, the census only asks for information from residents ages 17 and up, and there's no, would there be any other provision? So essentially, we would have to maybe edit the ordinance to say residents who can be certified through the records created by the city's annual census. Does that fit better? Okay.
And I don't know if, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in, but the University Accountability Report might be another vehicle, and that is shared both by Inspectional Services and D&D.
Okay.
And that goes back to where our residents are living, where our students are living off campus and all of that. But that might be another mechanism to find registered people.
Okay. And so how many staff does it take to certify 500 signatures when we're talking about, for example, running for office?
Well, depending on the workload, one person can probably take a day to do all those if they're not interrupted. Obviously, if the signatures are submitted to us in good format, we can read the writing of the signatures that are presented. Obviously, the more signatures we have to go through, the longer it will take to try to get to the 500.
Okay.
So.
And then in terms of the census, that happens once a year at the city level. But is there any way, if someone wanted to be added to the census off-cycle, is that possible, or?
Yes.
Okay.
So the census, we start doing the mailing in mid-January, and it's an ongoing process straight through almost until October, until we receive all the college dormitories. And then after that's all entered into the system, in the midst of working the elections, there's a lot of cleanup that has to be done as well, so we can remove all duplicates and so on and so forth.
Okay.
So it's pretty much a year cycle. As soon as we finish in December, we start all over again in January.
So if someone who didn't fill it out in January wanted to take part in a petition or something like that, they could find a form somewhere and turn it in before signing the petition, theoretically?
That's correct. They could go right online and submit their residence right on.
Okay, so in some ways, this could be an incentive for participation there too. And we know from the data that someone who signs any petition on a national level is more likely to both register to vote after that and to vote in the next election. Okay, that's all I had. Thank you very much.
So in honor of how everyone arrived, Councilor Flynn deferring to Councilor Janey, we've also been joined by Councilor Frank Baker as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in terms of the benefits, I think they're clear. Whenever we can kind of give power to the people, put it directly in the hands of the people, that's a good thing. But I guess my questions are in terms of implementation, and I would address them to you, Commissioner. In terms of the other towns that have free petitions like Newton or Chelsea, are there lessons that we know from them and how it works for them in terms of, getting the signatures certified? Are they looking at residence versus voter registration? What have we learned from other towns? Are you looking at that?
Yeah, I can speak to Newton, because actually one of our employees is a former employee of the Newton City Clerk and Election Department. In Newton, the number is very different. It's 50, and it's registered voters. So it's a little bit easier for them based on the number that they have to look at. But as Sabino pointed out, even for 500 signatures, it would only take one employee in one day for us. The other thing that would factor in was creating downloading the list and creating a database, then assigning it to an employee.
And would you see the pros and cons of using kind of the voter, would you suggest that the voter registration is a better database because it's cleaner? I mean, how many residents actually fill out the census?
Well, the current census information, and we have over 500,000 residents right now in our census database. Yes, the voter registration database is a cleaner database than the resident database because we get more information that can identify specific individuals, where some of the census information is not 100% complete. For example, colleges will submit a list of their residents to us, but we may not have the date of birth, for example.
And in terms of, so 500 can be done in a day, Sabino, but what if it's kind of the odd year and, I don't know, candidates are collecting signatures? What kind of backlog do you foresee if that was the case?
Well, that's what we mean by, depending on what's going on a particular day and what's the priority.
Right, so best case is 500 in a day. What's worst case?
Couple hundred.
People or hours?
No, people. So we can do a couple hundred certifications, signatures a day, or so, let's say. I
think that's it for now. Can come back.
Thank you, Councilor Janey. Chair recognizes Councilor Anissa Asabi-George.
I'm okay with questions at this time, thank you.
Council President Andrea Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty, and thank you, Councilor Wu, for bringing this back before the council, and thank you guys for being here. Just quick question, do we know of the municipalities in the Commonwealth that currently do this? Are any similar in population size to the city of Boston?
No, there is no other community that's similar in size to the city of Boston. So, yeah.
I know what you mean by that,
Yeah.
but I mean, like, for example, which municipality that currently does it, which one has the highest number of sort of residents? Is it 50,000? Is it 100,000? I'm only talking about the practicality and the difference between Boston, for example, in terms of number of residents versus some other municipalities that might be doing this.
Through the chair, Councilor Wu has that research.
Yep,
Yeah.
so it's Newton and Lawrence are the two biggest ones, 88,000 and 78,000.
Thank you, that's helpful. I think it provides a little bit of context in that the scope of this tool would be very different in the city of Boston. I'm all for transparency and thinking about tools that will allow folks to more easily participate in government. I think I can't speak for at-large councilors, no disrespect to my at-large councilors, for the district councilors, innovative tools that we were trying to think about at the district level to engage more of our residents. So speaking for myself, I'm constantly going around District 4 talking about over 70,000 residents in this district. On average, less than 10,000 come out to vote. But for me, engagement isn't just voting. So we have folks who engage with our office who don't actually vote, but still email us, still call us. So how can we reach more of those folks so that that number is a lot higher than less than 10,000? I worry about something like this for a couple of reasons. One is the workload. So I think I brought this up in the first filing around particularly some committees that have more work that comes through them. So government ops, for example, or public safety and criminal justice, now planning, development, and transportation. I worry about the priorities of individual counselors. So all of us take our cues from various folks, but I think district counselors take them from their district residents. I know I do. And so I listen to them and constantly think about what issues they want me to spearhead. And we know that in order to actually make a dent on any issue, whether it's diversity in law enforcement, talking about that with Councilor McCarthy, the body camera issue and how long and the amount of work it took to actually advance that. I worry about the hearings, and frankly, to me, it's not just important that people have a petition and have a hearing. After the hearing, then what are we going to do with that? I imagine folks wanted to turn into an ordinance, a policy change, or practice change, or something like that. So whether or not this is the best tool in terms of thinking about those workload challenges or the priorities that each office may have set for their offices and making sure that those get done along with new issues that might come up through this process is just something to think about. I think going back to, Madam Clerk, your sort of comment on the rules and currently, even if we didn't do something like this, there is a way to set up possibly a committee that could look at taking in petitions like this after verification of some sort through the elections department on the residents and of course verifying that folks are residents of the city of Boston and making sure they truly are residents of the city of Boston. And should we be determining if they've been residents for a period of time, or for a long period of time, for a year, for 30 days? That's not uncommon when coming to other things, other privileges or benefits we afford folks who live in the city of Boston. So I think this is definitely time for a working session. But I'm raising some of those concerns because right now we could possibly set up a committee that someone could chair that could bring in some of these petitions and have hearings on the petitions that come in some way. And then after the hearing to decide what happens next. I think that's a big lift. But if someone is willing to take that on, I but I think it's a big lift. But I do worry about the workload piece of this. Just looking at the priorities for residents in my district, and particularly if, for example, because I'm a district counselor and I'm hearing a lot about a certain issue that may fall within, say, public safety and criminal justice. I'm the vice chair of that committee. But if it doesn't fall within that committee work, or if it doesn't fall within a priority as dictated by the residents in my district, am I getting pulled to other districts where that might be a concern for folks in another district? So I think there's a lot of pieces to work out. Thank you for allowing me to go on and on and on with my things to consider as we do something like this. I think for me, it's not just about transparency and engagement. Is this the best tool to go forward? Frankly, if we look at legislation that this council passed in past years, it was looking at the amount of money, for example, that we spend in election years when the council is only on the ballot. And knowing in advance the number of folks that do not turn out for that election, but say turn out for the mayoral election, and whether or not our term should align with the mayor's, and what we could do with the savings from something like that to actually do a campaign around getting folks to engage in a more meaningful way. I mean, we could pay young people or others to do creative engagement work, whether it's a block captain model or something else, to get folks engaged, not just to file something for a hearing order, but to truly get them connected on a particular policy they care about, to get them connected at a school in their district, or organizations that reach out for mentors and want more mentors of color from their district. I think there's creative ways to think about engagement. So I'm just, I'm not a skeptic. I just think there's concerns that should be raised as from the district counselor perspective. But thank you guys for being here. Councilor Wu, thank you. And Jamal, thank you as well for bringing it forward.
Thank you, Council President. Councilor Zakam's going to defer to Councilor Lydia Edwards.
I had a couple comments, and I just wanted to say thank you all for being here today. And I thought your testimony was extremely informative. I also thank Councilor Wu and also Jamal Crawford for this leadership and getting this. I think it's a very important discussion to have about how we would want to be petitioned by our constituents in many cases. I have just a few suggestions for thoughts. I actually support this. I think it's great to have this kind of opportunity. I think 500 signatures might be a little bit too low, so I'd like to, again, re-examine how many signatures are required. I also think it might be worth us, just as we had mentioned before, it's a certain amount of signatures for us to run for office, but there's also a cutoff date for us to get those signatures in. So we might want to consider maybe within the first 3 to 4 months of the year to get your signatures in, or whatever time period it would be required for someone to get on the ballot. But there's a cutoff point after April, whatever date, for any citizen-driven petitions to be filed and have signatures in, so that we can then either disperse them appropriately amongst the committees, make sure that the city councilors aren't already working on this, and give us the time to really parse out the conversations that need to support them, and hopefully to follow up with those constituents and say, oh great, I see that from East Boston we're pushing something on trash cans. I'd love the time to talk to you about this. I fully support it actually, and maybe we could do something together. So I think we should examine a cutoff date for when these citizen-driven petitions can be filed, and then also a cutoff date for their hearings, maybe even designating certain hearing times once a month that would have those filed. So we're going to hear all of the X amount from this time. We're going to do the first 10 or first whatever, 10, 15, I don't know how many we're going to have, but this will be heard the first Friday of every month. We'll take the first 5 and the next 5 until we're done. So there's I think there's ways in which we can organize this so that we're driving it in a conversation that's not all over the place, and also making sure that 2 petitions aren't happening that are the same thing, right? And you can say that you guys can work this out, and we don't need both a hearing on the same thing just because someone from West Roxbury wasn't talking to someone from East Boston. I also think we should, I like the idea of actually having a specific committee for citizen-driven petitions, and that might be worth, again, talking about how that they could be filed in that committee, that person or a city councilor could co-chair with the otherwise committee that would receive that petition, and host those committees in a way in an organized fashion, as I mentioned, maybe once a month where all of them are given their fair share. And then I also wanted to make sure that the residency requirements is something that is somewhat concerning to me as well. I think Councilor Campbell talked about, how long it takes to be a resident for certain things, and if we don't have a requirement for that, we could end up with people becoming a resident just in time to sign a petition to have the City of Boston do something, and then abdicate that residency to go on and do whatever they want to do. But otherwise, I think that this is a wonderful way to engage community. It might, but also to be forewarned, it might also engage some very difficult, painful conversations as well. There's no constitutional limit on this. There's nothing that says a petition to segregate the schools couldn't happen. There's no petition here saying that, we want to make sure that we can discriminate against transgendered individuals. As a matter of fact, they have the petition on the ballot right now in November. So there's no limit. And so we just need to understand with freedom comes these also potential burdens and difficult conversations as well. And if we're mature as the City of Boston to accept that, that's fine. But there's no safeguard here. My constitutional rights as a woman, as a person of color, they all could be petitioned to limit that. But I think we need to have that acknowledgement as well.
Very good. Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Chair recognizes Councilor Tim McCarthy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Commissioner Sabino. Madam Clerk, good to see you on that side of the floor, kind of. I usually see you from the other way. I couldn't agree with Councilor Edwards more. A hammer is a tool. We keep saying the word tool, tool, tool. A hammer is a tool. You can use that hammer to knock in a nail, or you can use that hammer to beat somebody over the head. And that's what frightens me the most about this. We got into this business because we enjoy engaging the community. And I think we all got elected because they agree that we do engage the community well enough. And if they don't, then in 2 years, as Councilor Campbell said, they can make a statement and make sure that we engage when we're private citizens again. And that's important to me. The whole petition thing does scare me, and I'll tell you why. Dion and I, Commissioner Irish and I, have the honor of going to Suffolk University, and Dion is going to graduate in May with a master's in public administration. Congratulations, Dion. That's awesome. But I think he took the same class with me about petitions. And the reality is, to get 500 people to sign something isn't really a difficult thing to do. If I walk up to somebody and say, hey, we're going to have a petition about the Boston Public Works, don't you want your streets cleaner? Of course I do. It may not even be about that. Petitions are very fickle, and they can be worded. Statistics can be warped any way you want it, and so can petitions. There's an old statement about statistics that statistics are like a lamppost or a drunk guy. A drunk guy uses it to lean on, but most people use it for illumination. And that's the problem that we have with petitions, and that's what scares me. The other point that I just quickly wanted to make, and it's going to be obviously in the working session, we can continue to talk about it, is do we have a list of the issues that other towns, that they've actually brought, other petition towns? Because anybody who generally comes to us, and this may be more of a question in the working session to Clerk Feeney or even Council Flaherty or Council O'Malley, for that matter, who've been here a little longer than 4 years and 4 months like me, has anybody really ever been shot down that's brought something serious to the council? Has anybody ever said, oh no, we're not gonna have that hearing? So that concerns me too. So I'd like to know what positions have been brought up in other towns, and what shape of government the other towns have. Are they board of selectmen? Are they volunteer selectmen? Is this their full-time job? And what kind of impact do they have? And then the second piece to that question that we can discuss is why the elected officials at that time didn't address it in a better way. It kind of feels like we're taking an aspirin before we have the headache. I don't know if we have the headache yet. So I'm looking forward to the working session. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy. Chair recognizes Councilor Matt O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and to all my colleagues and those watching us here in the chamber. A lot of my questions have been asked, but I want to sort of piggyback on the line of questioning that Council President Campbell began. She asked about the size of cities or towns that are employing this as a tool. Do we know, do any city or town that employs this right to free petition, do they have full-time legislative bodies with staff, with central staffs, with weekly meetings? My guess is no. If the two largest are Newton and Lawrence, the answer is no. And to that point, which also Councilor McCarthy brought up, if we meet 40 times a year approximately, and there'd probably an average of about 5 hearing orders or ordinances at every council meeting. That's about 200 a year. Admittedly, not all have hearings, but that's separate from the budget hearing. So I guess my point is that, you know, it was said at the beginning of this hearing that we need to know about everything that's important to people. I absolutely agree with that. I know everyone in this room agrees with that. And if you don't agree and abide by that, you ain't staying in this position very long. But to suggest that a petition would allow us to understand or work on something, I think negates a lot of the good work that we have been doing, that we continue to do. Madam Clerk, you are probably the most uniquely qualified person to answer this question. You worked for a councilor, you were chief of staff for a councilor, you were a city councilor, you were the council president, you are now the clerk. You've spent you've been many decades in this. Well, yeah, I was going to say you were 3 when you started with the city, but you've spent a lot of time. Has there ever been an issue that you're aware of that the council didn't tackle that was important to 500 or 300 or 50 people? Can you think of one?
As I've listened to the testimony, I've tried to think of any situation where an issue was brought before the body that at least one councilor would not file for a hearing or to have some kind of a working session. I could try to go back and do a little bit of research. I don't know quite where I'd find the information, but to my knowledge, I can't think of any one situation that someone has not picked up the banner and ran with it. So, you know, and I think, you know, some of the wonderful ideas and the testimony that's been given today, you know, just because it's done this way in other cities and towns, Boston has always been unique. We're big. There are people in the suburbs who think we get too much of everything. We know that's not to be the case. But it does not prohibit us from taking the intention of this free petition and creating a system that allows people to literally come and meet with, you know, whether it's a committee or whatever, and say, you know, these are some issues that we're very concerned with. You know, sort of have some sort of an airing of it. But I personally cannot think of any, and we've had some really interesting hearings.
Yeah, I mean, it's somewhat of a joke, but we have sunscreen dispensers in our parks because I've told this story ad nauseum. Adrian Levin, now a doctor, was then in dermatology school, came to my office hours and said, I was at Hershey Park, Pennsylvania, there were sunscreen dispensers. I said, why did you come? And you should run with it. I said, why did you come to me? She said, because I know you love the parks and you're a ginger. And I said, you're right on both counts. But so I agree with you. And again, I don't mean to diminish the good work of Councilor Wu, and I think this is interesting and innovative. I just don't know that this is the right tool for the city. You know, in many, many, many towns across the Commonwealth, we have the purest form of democracy called town meeting form of government. It works splendidly in small towns. They literally will pass a budget. It's a participatory budget. It harkens back to when this country, and indeed the city, was founded. It wouldn't work in the city of Boston. I mean, it would be unworkable for a city of 680,000 people, and I think we wouldn't be straight with ourselves if we suggested otherwise. So, again, I appreciate what is the intent of Right for Free Petition. I know it's done to varying levels of success at the state level. I believe Mass is the only legislature that has the right of free petition. Some have been some good ideas. Others have landed in late-night talk show host monologues with some of these bills that have been introduced because a state rep or state senator had to do it. So I appreciate, again, the good work. Anything we can do to increase civic engagement, we should do. I'm not sure that this is the right way to go about it for the city, but look forward to continuing to work on subsequent working sessions and whatever. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. Councilor Flynn, back in his seat. You would like to be recognized? Comments?
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty, and I just want to say thank you to Councilor Wu for her leadership on this issue, and I look forward to learning more about the issue, how this impacts the residents of Boston. But again, I just want to say thank you to Councilor Wu for her strong leadership on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Recognizes Councilor Frank Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with the comments from Councilor O'Malley and Councilor McCarthy that I think it's probably our job to go to the petitions that come in. And when I saw this, I was thinking about if anybody had come in to me and something was important to them, I would think that I would file it. So, but not saying that, I'd also be open to something like the council president suggested, and also Lydia had some really good ideas. I think there may be maybe some kind of like pathway or structure for us to set up to hear them, so people could get in front of our committees if people want to. I mean, I don't really like to have my hand forced. If you put something in my committee now, I have to have a hearing in X amount of weeks, whatever it is. Although I would be open to being forced to have a meeting with somebody. Okay, if they file something with the clerk, then they want some of your time and something like that, you know. But thank you, Michelle. Thank you for your time. And really good points, good hearing today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And
Thank you.
If I may, I'm sorry, just I did remember one. At one point when, I can tell you, Bowden Street in Dorchester in District 3 was, it was such a scary place. I mean, there was gunfire 24 hours a day, just drugs, everything. And I, as a counselor, proposed a curfew. I can tell you that was one of the ugliest periods I ever had serving on this body. But that's how bad things had gotten, that we were actually afraid for young people to be out on the streets after a certain time. And it did not pass. But it was the working with the Boston Police Department. But the interesting thing is it really engaged the community. And so although the curfew was never, which I look back now and I say, really, was that great of an idea? But I think we were all so desperate because we had young 16, 17, 13-year-old kids being killed. I mean, it was just awful. But it really engaged the community in terms of what we can do, and having walking beats on Bowden Street and that area. I think this is wonderful work, and some of the ideas today I think are fabulous because we are different, and maybe this wonderful discussion will bring about a process that is so fair to the people who maybe aren't quite as engaged, who are new to the city and say, how do I become engaged? And this is a great vehicle. So I thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for this panel. And if you would be willing just to stay, we have someone willing to offer public testimony. I see Jamal Crawford is in the audience, and if Jamal can make his way over to and if there's anyone else here that wishes to offer public testimony, now is the time to do so. And feel free to queue up right behind Jamal. Jamal, welcome. If you can just state your name and affiliation for the record.
Absolutely. Jamal Crawford, community resident and activist from Roxbury community newspaper, The Blackstonian. Well, first of all, I'd like to start off with compliments, because oftentimes when I'm in city or dealing with government, it's often a complaint. And so I want to extend a compliment to you from the last testimony. You really wowed me with your knowledge of, the city and the inner workings. And I used to work here when you were on the council and whatnot. And so I've seen you work as a councilor, now as a clerk. But I think that the information and just the way that you were discussing it showed a level of thoughtfulness that I think is even bigger than the job that you hold, if you will. It seems like you really have a care and concern for your job in the city, and I appreciate that. And also, too, the election department and Commissioner Irish. The election department is one of those offices in the city that I never had a problem with. And the election department for years has been operating with professionalism. When I ran for office, answering questions upon question, and just always taking the time to make sure that everything was above board. And you have continued in that tradition, and I thank you for that, and I thank you for the testimony in this regard. And likewise to the council for having this conversation, agreements, disagreements, questions, concerns. I think that Councilor McCarthy said we could be taking the aspirin before we have the headache. I think that's a good thing. See, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So I think that this will allow us to have some dialogue that might get in front of some issues before they become larger issues and more difficult to manage. I want people to not really view this as in competition with the nature of the advocacy and the community engagement that you do, but rather as a complement to it. Because I think that, you know, while you are in the district, whether it's districts or citywide, constantly meeting with people, God knows how many community meetings and affairs and events, but you just don't get to reach everybody. And there are some people who are averse to coming in here, a forum like this, some people who are averse to going to the event, but they have a great idea. They have a great issue, and they have a knowledge of this issue that I think would be served by allowing an open mechanism to once again get the best ideas. And this is not just about a complaint box where people just saying, this is what's wrong with the city, we want to do something. I think that too, if we depend on our citizenry and residents here, that you'll find a wealth of knowledge. We have people here who are technical geniuses, scientific geniuses in health and education and you name it. And I think that the right to free petition in the city of Boston would kind of cull the best ideas from amongst those who, first of all, you're not going to get ideas from people who don't care, because the very nature of them not caring, they're not going to care, they're not going to go through it. So what you're going to do is you're going to get stuff from people who are passionate. And some of the concerns about, you know, the legitimacy of an issue, I was just saying to Commissioner Irish beforehand, yeah, if somebody says we should have a hearing on you know, we need a UFO landing pad in Franklin Park, yeah, that should be off the table. So there should be some actual valid point there. It should not be duplicative of other efforts or other hearings. But also, too, there should be, and maybe there could be some prior conversation beforehand where these people are reaching out to councilors directly. I can remember a couple of times where ideas that were brought forth from the community that were not roundly met with open arms from the city council. And primarily that's based on, I think, personality and also geography. Great example, McCarthy did. I don't know if you know this. Sunscreen's not a big deal in my community. I don't know if you're aware of that. Never wore sunscreen in my life. But somebody brought it to you, resonated with you, you carried it through, and it went forth. I would submit that there are issues like that from my community that some people are not hearing in the same way, might not apply to everybody. Some people say, oh, it doesn't matter to me. But it will allow a platform for these ideas to be brought forth. And also, as you said, hearkening back to the beginning, you know, of when the country was founded in Boston and Massachusetts, and you see these old movies, and gentlemen, and you know, people are having open debates on floors. I think that the right to free petition opens that up to the citizenry. Everybody has not had the good fortune to be elected by the community. And I think that if we listen and open up the floor to more voices, I think it's better for all of us. The last thing I would say in terms of signatures and all this type of thing, how it's going to work, we would have to defer to the experts, Madam Clerk and Commissioner Irish from elections, so that we want it to go smoothly as possible. We don't want to create, you know, more problems, you know, databasing and stuff like that. I would hope that we would be able to bring in the Do It office as well. That may be able to bring some more technology to bear in that regard. But the one thing that I wanted to say about the signatures. 500 signatures, you're not running for office. But these are 500 signatures that are not necessarily verified. They're not on a voter's list. So that gives you a wide appeal. So it kind of gives you a little, takes a little away in terms of how difficult it may be for a person. Councilor McCarthy said getting signatures for petitions is not that difficult. Once again, I guess it would depend. And if you're using manipulation, you're not telling the whole story, that always happens. But it happens in elections anyway. People who don't understand issues that are on the ballot, people don't really have a good sense of what candidates are going on or what issues are going on. I mean, there are certain things that we're not going to be able to prevent from happening in society. So I would say let's not worry about that, and let's look towards the best of it. We want to create the best mechanism to bring forth the best ideas that are not crazy, that are not duplicating other efforts. And the signature basis, I think, I liked it better at 250. being that a person who comes from one particular community, my district, let's say District 7, if you're in the district, I think you should only be bound by maybe the signatures of the district that you live in, not by the citywide thing. And lastly, I'll say on that, because the difference between a person who's running for office and a regular citizen who has an idea is a person who's running for office generally raises money, opens a bank account, generally has either staff or volunteers, and generally has some sort of base. They might have been prior in office or a job or whatever. And I think it might be an unfair threshold and comparison for just average Joe or Susie citizen, particularly if that citizen is a youth or an elder or from any disenfranchised community that makes doing anything more difficult than others. I think that was it. I believe there was one more point, but I can't think of it now. The right to free petition, I believe, is the best thing that we have for Boston to get better ideas from the community. And please, let's not look at this as any besmirchment on the city council or anything. Let's just open it up to more people. To me, the more the merrier. All right? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamal. Anyone else wishing to offer public testimony at this point? Seeing and hearing no additional desire. Final wrap-up, Councilor Janey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just, wanted to say thank you to Councilor Wu, to Mr. Crawford for his great testimony just now. I think this is a very important issue to continue to discuss. I'm looking forward to any working sessions. As I said earlier, putting the power in the hands of the people, I think, is a really good thing. I think it's a democratic thing to do. I think there are questions, as you've heard from this discussion, that I'm hopeful that we can work out. I think I've taken for granted, as someone who has been a community organizer, who found it very easy to work with past district councilors who sat in the seat that I'm sitting in now, whether, Councilor Jackson or Councilor Turner, to kind of organize here. Like, I did it all the time. But my experience and the experience of ordinary residents could be very different. And so I think, continuing this conversation to see how it could work makes sense. So I appreciate, again, the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Janey. Any other colleagues? Sure. Councilor, Chair recognizes Councilor Anissa Rasabi-George.
And through the chair to the maker, I am curious about, I think it'll probably be fleshed out during the working session, the variety of signature requirements, and then also considering the registered voter question that came up, and then also the age of the signator, because I think, we think about education issues, we think about issues that might pertain specifically to youth. How do we make sure that they have their voice heard, but also recognize that a document that's being signed for the right to free petition does carry a significant weight to it if it were to require us to hold a hearing on it. So I think that will all come out in the working session, but I think that the numbers question on how many signatures to require, they're sort of the identity of the person who's signing, whether they need to be registered to vote or somehow officially captured in our local census for identification purposes, and then also any age requirements that we'd have on that, creating a valid signature.
So I want to thank everyone for all your feedback. I think we're all aiming for the same thing, and this is really helpful, and I feel good about next steps and moving to the working session. Just to be totally explicit about why the signature requirement was resident and not registered voter, it was intentional to try to make sure that we are engaging all of our residents, even those who are not registered to vote by choice or are not registered to vote because they are not citizens. So wanting to make sure we're including our undocumented immigrant residents who are not able to register to vote. Wanting to make sure we're including people who are younger than voting age. So I think there's some question there about if the census picks up at 17, what do we do if it's someone trying to sign who's younger, or is there some provision for that? But I feel like all these details we can we will figure out in working session, but the goal is to create a mechanism that would encourage people to participate in every way, whether it's engaging with the council, signing up for the city's official census and getting their information to us that way, and then hopefully participating in future elections and getting more and more involved and maybe running for office after that too. So I'm very grateful to everyone for their time.
Well, thank you, Councilor Wu, for your efforts. Thank you to the administration, the election department, Commissioner Dion Irish and Sabino Piemonte, and obviously for our clerk as well for your input, as well as the public for participating and showing up. And with respect to docket 0174, an ordinance regarding the right to free petition, the Committee on Government Operations is adjourned.